Hi everyone, I'm Salma and my partners are Claire and John, and today we'll be talking about adolescents with autism spectrum disorder and post-secondary transitions.
So here's a brief outline of our presentation. We're going to start by reviewing the symptomology of autism spectrum disorder and some key definitions, as well as reviewing our SEED article. From there, we're going to review the occupation-based models that we used throughout our presentation, and then we're going to dive deeper into specific areas of transition, which are transition to post-secondary education, work, and independent living.
So first we'll be talking about what autism is. So autism is a disorder where there are primary and secondary characteristics. So for example, one might struggle with communication, like keeping up a conversation, socializing with peers, and they might engage in repetitive behaviors like walking back and forth. Some secondary characteristics might include being hypo or hypersensitive to certain simulations, and also having behavioral issues or mental health issues like anxiety or depression. Additionally, it's important to note that the manifestation of autism may change over time due to their environment, and it's also different from person to person.
So what is the definition of transition in the OTPF? Transition is movement from one life role or experience to another. And OTs can assist an individual, group, or population in transitioning. When helping an individual or a group, the focus is on transitioning, and it is facilitating a client or a group member move from one life role or experience to another. And some examples of outcome in this would be moving to a new level of care, transitioning between providers, or moving into a new setting or program. With regard to population, it's more of a sustainability plan. So some examples of outcomes would be develop action plan to maintain a program, or identify sources of funding, or building community capacity and support relationships to continue the program.
So we'll be talking about our SEED article. So our SEED article was a systematic review of the involvement of students with autism in the transition planning process. And so the purpose of our article was to examine the participation of students with autism during their individualized education planning transitional sessions. So these IEP meetings were basically for the students to gain the resources that they need to in order to succeed in school. And these transitional sessions were mostly to prepare them to move beyond high school. So the concern here was that students often have trouble with transitional life events such as work, college, and also living independently. And what they found was that students often had a limited role in these meetings. Even though they were present at these meetings, they weren't actively participating or voicing their concerns. And so the article mentions that moving forward, we should better inform our students on what the purpose of these meetings are so they are better able to participate and voice their concerns. The meetings should be focused on the student and could even be student-led, and we should be able to teach students on how to advocate for their needs and their concerns.
So as Salma had just reviewed, the SEED article had identified 3 areas of transition that were difficult for adolescents with ASD, and those areas of transitioning were post-secondary education, work, and independent living. We each chose a subject of transition that we had the most exposure to and interest in.
So the models we used to analyze articles was the Person Environment Occupation Performance Model, the PEOP, and the Model of Human Occupation, MOHO. Now looking at PEOP, PEOP is a client-centered model that utilizes the top-down approach and has 4 components, which are in the name. Person, which are the person factors, environment, which consists of the physical and social environment, occupation, which is the characteristics of the activity, task, or role, and performance, the act of doing. Now, with regards to MOHO, the core concepts of MOHO that the practitioners must address are the motivation for occupation, the individual's routines to support performance, the skills the individual employs to perform their daily occupations, and the influence of the environment of occupation. The environment offers opportunities, resources, demands, and constraints. And as we know, the environment can be physical or social, and the environment provides different levels of support to doing in every individual because every individual is unique. In MOHO, the environment is considered to be all settings in which the activity or task is performed. Some key terms for MOHO: volition is a process that motivates choices and actions. Personal causation reflects our awareness of our present and potential abilities and our capacity to do what we need to do. Values and interests are also central to our choice of occupations. Habituation consists of habits and roles, and habits are learned ways of doing occupations that unfold automatically in our daily lives and are environmentally dependent. Roles are how people see themselves. And performance capacity is the client's capacity to perform that relates to their musculoskeletal, neurological, cardiopulmonary, and other body system capabilities.
And so now we'll be transitioning to post-secondary education. For here, I want you guys to stop and think about the time you were first heading to college and what emotions or experiences come to mind. So as we go through the presentation, keep these things in mind and try to remember what it was like to head into college and what this transition was like. So what is post-secondary education? So it's any education after high school. This can include 2 to 4 years of college or even a vocational training for different fields. And the OTPF defines education as any activity that allows you to learn in an educational setting. And so here we'll be focusing on formal educational participation. So this includes academic studies such as writing, reading, being able to do your homework, but it also includes non-school related activities such as socializing with your classmates. So to research this topic, I used a method where I used key terms or phrases related to the following questions. What are the experiences of those with autism in transitioning to college, and what could make the transition to college smoother for these students? So in terms of my databases, I used the CSUDH library database in addition to Google Scholar, and I used terms and phrases such as autism and transitioning to college, autism and transition plan, and autism and post-secondary education. And so the article I'll be talking about is High School to College, Transition Experiences of Young Adults with Autism. So the purpose of this article was to examine the experiences of students with their transition from high school to college. And it focused on a group of 5 students, and they were transitioning from high school to a community college. And so the common issues that they found was that students often had trouble with socialization. So this can include engaging with classmates or friends. 2 of the participants noted that they participated in activities where they were able to form these friendships. However, these friendships didn't really last since there was a lot of social skill gaps between them. Additionally, communication was an issue as some people with autism might experience high anxiety and in talking to others. And so one parent noted that their child sometimes would break out into hives into even thinking about asking for help or finding help. Additionally, some of the students struggled with executive functioning, such as initiating certain actions, such as looking for colleges or even looking at classes or even decision making. So some of the resources that they mentioned was disability services. So the colleges that they attended did have disability services, but some of the students didn't register for disability services and some of them didn't use them. Additionally, there was also writing and math support provided at their school, which one student said that they used, which helped with their transition. Additionally, the students who did go to public high schools did receive individualized education planning, which slightly helped with their transition as well. So what they found was that there are certain factors that affect how smooth a transition is. So one of these factors was motivation. Some students mentioned how they wanted a stable income and wanted to be able to support themselves. Another student mentioned how they had a goal of becoming a biologist. Another student mentioned how they wanted to go to college because their parents really wanted them to go, and so that was their motivation. Depending on their awareness of disability, this also affected their transition, because if they had a high awareness of what they needed and what they were capable of and what things that they needed help on, they were able to look for resources to gain that help. However, if they had one student had a low awareness of their disability and wasn't exactly sure how autism affected their daily living, and so they didn't feel like they needed to look for those resources. Additionally, the transition services that they were provided, such as transition services at the high school, this affected their transition, as well as they were able to get supports in applying for colleges. Additionally, whether or not the students had a clear career-wise or college-wise goal, this affected their transition, as those who had a clear goal were able to have clearer steps to reach their goals, whereas those students who didn't really have a clear goal, it was kind of harder for them since their path was more vague. So this article's contribution to OT, we can be vigilant about these factors and keep them in mind when meeting a client. So looking at their factors of motivation, of how aware they are, can help us think of interventions and how we can better help them. Additionally, this article might not apply to all college settings, as we know that all colleges have different types of services and different types of supports. So even though we take these factors in mind, it might not necessarily be applicable. And when we look at this article through the lens of MOHO, you can see that through volition, some of the students were very motivated and most were interested in continuing their education and had a goal. In terms of personal causation, so this mostly has to do with their self-awareness. So for those who are more aware, they were able to get more resources. However, those who were less aware struggled a lot more. Additionally, some believed for values, some believed that going to college was important, and others cared more about what their parents thought, and this also contributed to their transition. Additionally, some of them had the habits of looking for resources and looking for disability services when they needed it. However, others did not. And their roles right now is being a student in college. And in terms of their environment, since they went to like different schools, some of them had more supportive teachers or more supportive parents, which helped them with their transition and gave them greater access to what they needed, while other students had parents who kind of left them on their own to figure things out. And so this is a video about a student who had high volition and was very self-aware of what he needed.
You have to reach out to the disability services if you need help in that aspect with a private room or for distraction-free or more testing time, and realize what you need and not expect everyone to always know what you need. So a lot of that is self-advocacy. By telling your professors that you're on the spectrum, they're going to give you that help. But if you don't, I mean, they won't know how to.
Yeah, so that video is just an example of how students who are more self-aware, they will be more likely to reach out for these services and gain the help they need.
You have to reach.
And so for our next article, it is on perspectives on support needs of individuals with autism spectrum disorder. So the purpose of this article was to consider all the aspects that should be thought of when planning for college. So this article notes that we should think about the college environment and whether or not they have disability services, what study methods are better for college as they are very different from high school, and also what level of independence that they need to thrive in college. Additionally, we should think about the emotional adjustment of these students as they might feel lonely or just out of place in this very new environment. And as mentioned in the other article, like, social skills and also executive functioning are both something that we should look at, since it's something that they struggle with. So currently there is the Americans with Disabilities Act, and so this requires schools to have disability services. And so right now students have to contact these disability services and show proof that they do have a disability, and once they get like a letter saying that they're eligible for services, they have to then contact their professors and let them know. So a lot of the burden is on the students to reach out to these services and to tell their professors that they need additional services such as extra time on tests. And so the article notes that in the future and when planning for transitions, we should help students become self-advocates, since in college there's a lot less supports, and so we should teach them how to ask for help and how to reach out to services and how to research things on their own. And we should take a holistic approach, so not just think about academics, but also how can they better socialize, how can they better communicate. We should also look at their comorbid aspects such as anxiety or depression. So we have to keep those things in mind and make sure they also get these like mental health services. And we should be consistent in how we support them, especially in the first year of college. So that way they have something to look back onto, and hopefully in the future they'll need less supports if we're consistent in the beginning. So the article's contribution to OT is that practitioners can use this information when planning interventions and make sure it's holistic, make sure that we know how to better help them advocate for themselves. And again, this might not translate to all types of college settings, since all colleges are different, and the way that we reach out to services may also be different as well. And if we look at this article through MOHO, so this is kind of looking at through like a planning lens. So if we really want to help the students, we must like make sure that the students have to be interested in like continuing learning or having interest in a specific subject. And we have to assess whether or not they're self-aware and like whether they know what they're good at and what they're not good at. We have to see whether or not they find their school or their future career as significant. Additionally, we have to see how much they attend school and how much they reach out to services, how much they're taking care of themselves, since in college they'll be mostly on their own. And we should see what roles they play, such as whether they're a student, a friend, or like an athlete. And then we can assess the environment of the college that they will be transitioning into and see if there are any barriers or any supports for the student. Finally, for intervention, we chose education and training. And so the model is MOHO, and the framework we chose was applied behavior framework. And we chose this framework because it helps with forming new habits and planning, learning how to make decisions and reinforcements, and how we can assess their motivation. And so we chose the individual for this intervention. So interventions during high school, the practitioner can educate the student on the importance of planning and how rewarding it might feel to reach their goals. The practitioner might train the student in non-academic aspects, such as learning how to plan, learning how to have like more social skills, like how to reward themselves after they reach a goal, and also, which is really important, was how to self-advocate. And then once they go to college, the practitioner can then educate the student about finding different resources, finding a disability counselor who might be at the school, and how to find things that motivate them. And lastly, the practitioner can also train the students asking questions, especially in a big setting like a college, introducing themselves to like new students or just teachers, and also learning new study habits that will help them in college.
All right, so transitioning to work. Now, before we go into this portion of the presentation, we invite you to pause the video and think about the first time you were heading to your first job. What emotions or experiences come to mind? So go ahead and pause the video, take a second to reflect, and feel free to join back in whenever you're ready. So, moving forward for us, what is work? According to the OTPF4, work is labor or exertion related to development, production, delivery, or management of objects or services. Benefits may be financial or non-financial. And there are 6 topics under work in the OTPF, but we will be observing 3: employment interests and pursuits, employment seeking and acquisition, and job performance and maintenance. So how do we come across the research articles used for our presentation? So we utilized CSUDH's OneSearch. The keywords were autism or ASD, transition, occupational therapy or OT, and employment or work. And the databases were EBSCO, Academic Search Premier, and Gale Academic OneFile. Now, before looking at the articles, we felt it would be beneficial to understand the lived experience of someone with ASD transitioning to work. This is Phil Martin. Phil was diagnosed with ASD, school phobia, and ADHD as a teenager. Today, he currently works as an emergency dispatcher and photographer, but he shares his struggle with transitioning to work right out of high school.
Job. At that point, I was an emergency dispatcher, and it was the worst job I probably had. I worked in a place that didn't really embrace autism. They didn't really care that I was on the spectrum. So therefore, certain things, certain sensory issues that I dealt with, they didn't acknowledge, like the loud noises and the sensitivity to touch. It was a non-factor to them. It was.
Yeah, so that was Phil Martin. I highly recommend if you have the opportunity to watch the rest of that video. It's a 20-minute long video, so obviously we can't share it all today, but there was a lot of really important information in that video. So if you get the opportunity to, please go ahead and watch that video. So now looking at the articles that we found, the first one is going to be called Transitions Are Scary for Our Kids and They're Scary for Us. Family member and youth perspectives on the challenges of transitioning to adulthood with autism. Now, this was a qualitative study observing family member and youth perspectives through utilizing focus groups on transitioning to adulthood with ASD. The challenges for the family members were stigma, lack of fulfilling jobs, and lack of motivation from their child. So there's a social misconception that people with ASD could not work as a barrier to securing a fulfilling or quote unquote adult job. One mother stated, and I quote, "Having ASD does not mean they're not capable. Because I've run into this, or my husband has run into this himself because he's also on the spectrum. And once he identifies to an employer that he has ASD, he's cleaning. But he can rewire their entire computer network." And this just shows the stigma and how it affects people in this population's ability to garner fulfilling employment. Motivation for work was another concern for caregivers. As one noted, "I think my son will be successful, but not necessarily at what I want him to be successful at." Caregivers are worried that their youth were interested in jobs that were not really feasible, like computer gaming. And some were concerned about their youth motivation overall. As some parents stated, their child just lays around all day and watches TV. Now, with regard to adolescents, adolescents had interest in acquiring jobs. I mean, for example, one youth described his primary goal as finding a job I like. Another identified finding a job as the most important thing on their mind, thus showing how important finding work is to the adolescents in the study. However, unfortunately, actually obtaining a job was much more challenging. Many youth expressed interest in computers, cartoons, or video game programming, but most were not quite sure how to obtain them. Other participants had general fears about the future and becoming an adult. One youth said, "I'm not scared of the job market, I'm just scared. I don't know why, but I don't like thinking about the future." And to expand on this quote, another participant stated right after, "Becoming an adult for me is like a big step, because I may have to get a job. I never had a job that pays. I do a lot of chores around the house, and I don't feel like I'm ready to become an adult yet. I'm scared to have my first job because I don't want to get fired. And I don't want to work evenings because my medication just wears off." And these quotes demonstrate the general fear of adulthood and work for this population. Adolescents, furthermore, adolescents seemed reluctant to talk to their caregivers about work challenges and knew their caregivers also had expectations about their future careers. One participant stated, "Well, I don't talk to my parents because future goals change, and I'm afraid that they don't understand. It's just a fact that I keep quiet from my parents. I don't let them know too much about what I've been up to." Now, not all participants clearly state this exact reluctance, but the group seemed to have a general consensus regarding the difficulty in sharing fears and ideas about becoming an adult with their caregivers. And the major challenge that everyone agreed on, finding programs to support adolescents. And if they found a program, it was not very helpful and it didn't last long enough. And this is very critical to OT, as we can advocate for programs to assist this population, or we can provide our own intervention in assisting with the necessary work skills. And I'll go over this later in the presentation. So now, equating this article to MOHO, they had interest in gaining jobs, both the parents and the adolescents. Parents believe adolescents are capable of being effective in the workplace, and however, adolescents are unsure of their ability and are fearful. With regard to values, many adolescents believe that getting a job is of the utmost importance. Now, with regard to habits, parents state some of their children have bad habits. They watch TV all day and are unmotivated. And some internalized roles, parents are unsure if children are ready for the new role as an adult. Adolescents are fearful of the new role as adult as well. Now, with regard to environment, there's a social stigma revolving around the ASD population, believing they are incapable, which is very unfortunate. Now, let's look at the next article. The next article is titled, "I'm Destined to Ace This: Work Experience Placement During High School for Individuals with Autism Spectrum Disorder." Now, this was a qualitative study in which researchers held focus groups and interviews with adolescents with ASD, their mother, and the work supervisor. Adolescents went through a work program in an information and communication technology, an ICT, work environment that lasted 5 to 10 days. And adolescents worked a standard full day. They worked 7.5 hours per day, 5 days a week. And this program elicited very positive results for adolescents, their mothers, and work supervisors. And I'll go in a little bit more detail on the next slide. So, with regard to the article, they kind of divided it into experiences in the program and outcomes of the program. With regard to experiences in the program, there was preparing for the workplace. Parents helped adolescents prepare for work with regard to using public transportation and preparing appropriate work attire. The workplace supervisors also became educated on ASD from an occupational therapist prior to the adolescents joining their workforce. With regard to harnessing strength and interest of the adolescent, supervisors acknowledge the strengths of adolescents due to the education they receive from the occupational therapist and assign them tasks that would meet their strengths. One supervisor stated the participants would take to it like a duck to water. Furthermore, adolescents worked on tasks that captured their interests and elicited their best qualities and abilities. Overall, this helped reinforce adolescents' interests and career goals. One adolescent stated, "It reinforces my interest in software development." Developing work-related skills was also a very key theme. Work experience supervisors facilitated learning through providing a work culture that fostered learning and feedback. One supervisor stated, it's about a team creating opportunities to talk and interact and get feedback from everybody. That's a very active part of the day-to-day running the team. Adolescents were supported to develop time management skills. They followed a structured work routine, including allocated time for tea and lunch breaks, thus supporting these adolescents to separate time for work and for socializing. And in addition to work-related skills, adolescents were also provided the opportunities to develop other social and personal skills important in the workplace. Adolescents developed knowledge on topics such as meeting etiquette and how to present a work summary. Adolescents were also given the opportunity to develop leadership skills through teaching others. Now, some outcomes of the program, one was insight into the workplace. And participants reported that the work experience program provided a platform to apply their skills and knowledge in the real workplace. Also, another outcome was recognizing and realizing their potential. Successfully completing work tasks convinced adolescents that they were able to perform in the workplace, improving their confidence. The realization that their work made an impact provided them with a sense that they were able to contribute to society and make a difference. Supervisors reported that staff had gained insights and learned from the differing and unique perspectives of the adolescents. Also, supervisors reported that the program enhanced their organization's productivity. Working as a team was also a major outcome. And supervisors and colleagues were inspired by the participants' work performance. They were diligent in carrying out their work, producing high quality outputs beyond the staff's expectations. One supervisor stated, "You lift the bar and they will rock and roll. They are extraordinary. Their faces light up. They are suddenly so excited. They want to be there. They're like, finally, someone is going to teach me, treat me like an expert and not someone with a disability." And this is important because it helps diminish the stigma against this population. Now, looking forward was a big concept as well. Adolescents were exposed to different types of tasks in the ICT field, providing them with an opportunity to further explore and expand their interests. Now, equating this article through MOHO, on the next slide, please. Thank you. For volition, adolescents were interested in working, the parents were interested in adolescents working, and the supervisors were interested in employing and educating through the program. All winners. With personal causation, they were capable of being effective in the workplace, which is obvious and evident through all the reports. There were high values of working and experience, and there was confidence gained from working, which was a big value everyone was very happy about. With regard to habituation, habits. There were new habits acquired with preparing and participating in work. And adolescents really embraced their new role of a full-time employee. Now, with regard to the environment, workplace provided, the environment was provided through the workplace, and it was a positive social and cultural environment as workplace managers embraced adolescents. And I felt it was very interesting to show these two articles because in the first article by Cheek Zamora et al., they were discussing about how hard it was to acquire work, how adolescents with ASD are capable, but there is a stigma against their ability to work and how programs are very difficult to come by. While in this article by Lee et al., it showed that once a work program intervention is implemented, the adolescents with ASD thrive in their work and gain a lot from the experience. This is something that we as OT should keep in mind and advocate for, as many clients with ASD would likely benefit from these programs. Now, in addition to advocating for the programs, there are interventions that we can do with the individuals in this population and organizations looking to hire. One intervention for an individual with ASD transitioning to work would be to ensure that the client is capable of communicating their needs to their employer, being able to be effectively advocate for themselves. Also, developing social participation skills in other ways to be able to communicate effectively with coworkers, enhance professional meeting etiquette, and how to present a work summary, as it was seen in Lee et al.'s article. Additionally, an OT could develop IADLs. According to Chu and Dong's, according to Chu and Dong, IADLs that would need to be developed to be successful in the workplace would be driving and community mobility, financial management, and safety and emergency maintenance. Now, with regard to the organization, an OT could work on educating workplace supervisors on strengths of ASD employees, as I was seeing very beneficial in Lee et al.'s article. When an OT came and educated all the supervisors on the condition, the education delivered by the OT allowed supervisors to understand exactly which positions the employees would flourish in. Now, with regard to the individual interventions, the applied behavioral and cognitive behavioral frame of reference would be used. And for the organization interventions, the social cognition and third wave cognition frame of reference would be used. All interventions were conceptualized through MOHO.
Okay, so for our last topic, we're going to move into the transition to independent living for adolescents with ASD. Before we begin, we're going to have you stop and do a little critical thinking activity. And we'd like you to think about the first time that you were going to live away from home. What emotions or experiences come to mind? And we want you to kind of keep this in the back of your mind as we move through this topic. So in our presentation, the term independent living is going to combine the OTPF's definition of independence and the term living, which will refer to an individual's residency. So the OTPF defines independence in the following way. Occupational therapy practitioners consider clients to be independent, whether they perform the specific occupations by themselves in an adapted or modified environment with the use of various devices or alternative strategies, or while overseeing activity completion by others. Simply put, in this presentation, independent living refers to an individual residing apart from a parent, guardian, or supervised setting. According to the articles we will review, occupations important for independent living can include home establishment and management, financial management, safety and emergency maintenance, and social participation. It's important to note that independent living may not always be a desirable or appropriate goal for adolescents with ASD. The OTPF also highlights that clients may not view independence as success depending on their needs, desires, and cultural background. Databases used to gather research on the transition from secondary school to independent living was EBSCO Host, Collections, VSCSUDH University Library, and the American Journal of Occupational Therapy. Search terms included autism or ASD or autism spectrum disorder and adolescents or teenagers or young adults or teen or youth, and the terms independent living or housing or residential independence. Articles were limited to the past 10 years with participants that had ASD and no other existing conditions. Participants had to be adolescents post-high school, and the articles had to have a specific focus on independent living. Few studies have focused solely on the barriers, enablers, or other phenomena associated with transitioning to independent living, which has left a gap in the literature and an opportunity for occupational therapists to explore this area of transition deeper. Prevalence and correlates of post-secondary residential status among young adults with an autism spectrum disorder is a qualitative longitudinal study published in 2014, and it used data from a national longitudinal transition study. The study compared the residential statuses of adolescents with ASD after high school graduation with adolescents that had other disabilities, such as intellectual disabilities, learning disabilities, and emotional disturbances. The study was nationally representative with 620 post-secondary adolescents with ASD. The participants were primarily male. Data was collected through open-ended questions and responses were coded into 3 categories of living arrangements. The first category was with a parent or guardian, which included other adult family members, foster parents, or relatives. The second category was in a supervised setting, which included medical facilities, group homes, correctional facilities, and the like. And the last category was independent living arrangements, which could include living with their roommate or spouse in university housing or in military housing. Overall, the study found that individuals with ASD were the least likely to be living independently after high school graduation in comparison to other adolescents with disabilities. Adolescents with ASD were only 17% likely to be living apart from their parents, opposed to 36 to 65% for other disabilities. It was found that within the first 2 years out of high school, no adolescents with ASD in this study lived independently. In comparison, 2.2% of adolescents with other learning disabilities were living independently within their first 2 years of post-high school. The adjusted odds of ever living independently by the age of 25 was 5 to 2.2 times higher for those with other disabilities. There were higher correlates of independent living for those from families with higher household incomes, higher functional skills, and stronger conversational abilities. And this finding is congruent with results in a study by Heist et al. In 2015, which found that increased autistic symptomology has a negative correlation with rates of independent living. Adolescents with ASD had the highest rates of residential continuity. So 79.1% of participants lived in the same situation since leaving high school. And this suggests that adolescents with ASD are not receiving the same opportunities to explore residential options as other adolescents with different disabilities. The results of this study also reveal that adolescents with ASD are particularly vulnerable during the initial 2 years post-graduation with lower rates of engagement. Additional research should be done to determine the factors contributing to this phenomenon. However, as identified in our other articles, adolescents with ASD experience many barriers to transitioning post-high school, so the phenomenon of vulnerability within the first 2 years post-high school could be in part due to the lack of sufficient services, as identified in our SEED article as well. In another study by Asselt-Gaberts et al. In 2015, the social networks of adolescents with ASD was compared to the social networks of neurotypical participants. It was found that adolescents with ASD reported lower satisfaction with the social networks in their communities, and lower satisfaction was identified as a barrier to successful transition to independent living. Living Alone with Autism is a case study that was published in 2020 and focused on the lived experiences of a 24-year-old man with ASD living alone for the first time in a city in India after his caretakers had passed away, and his caretakers were his parents. The methodology consisted of an in-depth interview of both the participants and his aunt, as well as observation of the participant in the participant's home. 5 themes had emerged from this case study. The first was the importance of social supports for the participant when transitioning to independent living. Relating to social supports, the second theme was a need for family coping methods in education. The third theme was the expressed difficulties relating to living alone, such as concern for safety and learning new skills. The fourth theme was the need for long-term care planning. And though not overtly mentioned by the author, the participant's strengths were frequently highlighted, making it the 5th theme. And included in his strengths were the supports available to him, such as his extended family, personal attributes, as well as how symptoms of his condition had acted as a support to transition. And though this case study was very informative and interesting, there were many limitations. For example, the researcher did not elaborate on any limitations or methods used to reduce bias, misrepresentation of data, and etc. And because the study took place in India, there are possible cultural elements of the case study that may be misunderstood or misinterpreted by a Western reader. Also, elements of the study may be misrepresented in the translation. A good way to interpret this case study is through the lens of, a good way to interpret this case study through the lens of occupational therapy is utilizing the PEOP model. This model is compatible because of its focus on narrative, as well as the focus on barriers and enablers within the occupation, person, and their environment. So, focusing on narrative, we can consider important events in the past, present, and future that may be influencing participation or performance in occupation or their overall well-being. In this case study, the participant previously lived with his parents as his caregivers, and due to their abrupt death, he now lives alone in their home and is learning to adjust to new habits, routines, and roles necessary for independent living. He also has the frequent social and coaching support of his extended family members and plans to remain living independently in his parents' home. For the participant's goals, the participant had identified a desire to continue living in his parents' home independently, which could be interpreted as a long-term goal. It was also expressed that he was lonely because he was usually alone. The social support of his extended family had improved his mood, volition, and self-efficacy, So building a stronger social network could also be a possible goal. Moving into occupations, person and environment, and the enablers and barriers regarding those. For the occupations, there were barriers to occupational performance in home establishment and management, such as household cleaning and yard work. Though capable, there was no indication that the participant was taught many life skills from his parents before they passed, and this contributed to other barriers in occupational performance, such as meal preparations and cleanup and personal hygiene and grooming. He did appear to have high occupational performance in money management, and though he was unemployed, he was equipped to find work since he had a degree, but he did display difficulty with job retention. Looking at person factors, within the symptomology of autism is a tendency to function well in routines. So advantageously to him, this person factor enabled him to quickly implement cleaning, grooming, and feeding routines taught by his aunt, and thus he adapted quicker to independent living. He also displayed person factors of high self-efficacy, high self-awareness, and high cognitive processing, all of which have enabled his transition. He expressed impaired social skills, making it difficult to read and trust others, creating a barrier to building social networks. Next, moving into his environment, enablers within his physical environment included his home that he recently had updated. However, he appeared to be lacking necessities such as a mattress and common kitchenware. His social environment consisted of his extended family, and his cultural environment included his Indian nationality and his Hindu religion. Enablers in his social and cultural environment included his family's effort to support him emotionally and socially, as is customary within his religion, as well as coach and teach him basic living skills and responsibilities. A social and cultural environmental barrier is the harmful stigmas within his family, leading to rejection and isolation. For example, the aunt blamed the death of the participant's mother on the participant's condition, and also expressed the elements of resentment, fear, and difficulty coping within the client's condition. Regarding policy environment, it's unclear how policy in India supports or constrains independent living for individuals with ASD, but due to the lack of long-term planning and no indication of governmental supports, there may be inadequate or no supports in place for him at all. Through the lens of the PEOP model, this case study provides insight into the complex dynamics contributing to occupational participation, occupational performance, and well-being for clients with ASD transitioning to independent living, especially in situations of abrupt transition such as this. The collaborative support model for students on the autism spectrum in college and university housing is a model produced by staff members at the University of Wisconsin-Stout in 2013 and is focused on assisting adolescents with ASDs transitioning into independent living in post-secondary education settings. The barriers experienced during this transition are often linked with common symptoms of ASD, such as atypical social behaviors or difficulty with communication. According to this model, some communication barriers for students with ASD transitioning to campus housing are difficulty developing peer relationships, difficulty adjusting to shared living spaces, difficulty managing the organizational aspects of independent living, and difficulty coping with complex sensory issues. Complications can lead to roommate conflicts, anxiety, social and physical isolation, and student attrition. This model has a focus on best practice and is based on 5 strategies. These strategies are sensitivity to stigma and respecting the client's right to confidentiality, training and educating the campus community to create a culture of inclusion, mentorship and coaching for both staff and students with ASD, early campus and housing arrival programs for students with ASD to allow for more time for adjustment and preparation, and addressing logistical considerations such as housing preferences. All aspects of this model fall within the OTPF's domains and practices. This model considers environmental factors that support or hinder occupations such as home establishment and management, IADLs, home management, education, and social participation. The 5 strategies fall under OT intervention categories of education and training, advocacy, and occupational justice. Though there is little research on the barriers and enablers to successful transition to independent living for adolescents with ASD, the importance of social supports for transition success emerged as a very common theme in these articles and a huge emphasis. OTs working with this population should place an emphasis on community involvement with an approach to create, establish, or maintain social networks. Group therapy can be a great intervention to create social capital. According to the OTPF, outcomes for group interventions may include improved social interaction, increased self-awareness through peer support, and a larger social network. Keneally et al. In 2011 identified that sensory over-responsiveness in people with ASD ages 18 to 40 was correlated with low perceived social supports. Another article by Charney et al. In 2017 identified that sensory integration in group settings for children with ASD was beneficial to improving social skills. The evidence from these articles supports that combining sensory integration interventions for adolescents in group settings could increase their perceived social supports and improve social skills for adaptation to independent living. Other group interventions for independent living could focus on creating, establishing, modifying, educating, or consulting on home safety measures and life skills such as meal prep and housekeeping. And these type of skills can also be taught at the person level as well as the group level. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for watching, and we look forward to your questions. And here are references.